chronologically. So Genesis 6, I maintain, is entirely in a pre-flood context. And when I started to look at the texts that we talk about a lot, Enoch, Joshua Jubilees in particular, I found that I started referring to them as the synchronized, biblically endorsed, extra-biblical text because they are synchronized in the sense that they're telling the same story in the same chronological order of events that we read in Genesis. Biblically endorsed because the people in the Bible are quoting from these books, are referencing them directly and indirectly, in some cases even mentioning by name, and extra biblical, of course, because they're no longer currently in our canon of Scripture. But what I noticed was Genesis 6, 1 through 4 describes the event of angels mating with human, and that syncs up with, coincidentally, Enoch chapter 6, verses 1 through chapter 7, verse 2, and Jubilees 5, 1. And also the recap that Jubilees gives in chapter 7 after the flood basically knows, like, yeah, this is the deal. This is what happened. This is why everything got screwed up. So that all syncs up with Genesis 6, 1 through 4. Genesis 6, 5 through 7 shows how God feels about the resulting violence, which syncs up with Enoch 7, 3 through 6, and Jubilees 5, 2 through 4. Genesis 6, 8 through 10 reveals how Noah and his sons were genetically pure, where it says that he was pure in his generations. The word there is tamim. It's the same word used for the pure red heifer, without spot or blemish. So it's telling you that Noah is genetically pure. So it stands to reason, and there are various texts that talk about who his wife was. Joshua tells you who his wife was as a daughter of Enoch. There are other texts that have other points of view, but at any rate, we know that he picked a righteous bride. So if Noah and his bride are righteous and pure, then it stands to reason that his 3 sons would also be pure. So Genesis 6, 8 through 10 syncs up with Joshua 4, 12 through 15, also Joshua 5, 13 through 17, and Jubilees 5, 5. Then we get to Genesis 6, 11, and 12. We see the earth and all flesh have become corrupted. That syncs up with Joshua 4, 16 through 18, and Jubilees 5, 19. And I think it's also Jubilees 7, 24 as well. Genesis 6, 13 through 17, God grows increasingly angry and tells Noah to build the ark and tells him how to do it. That syncs up with Joshua 4, 19 through 21, and 5, 25 through 29, and Jubilees 5, 21 and 22. And then we get the first mention of the 3 wives of Noah's 3 sons in verse 18. And I always get to this point, I ask the audience, which comes first, 12 or 18? People say, well, 12 came first. Okay, well, what happened in 12? All flesh became corrupted. So then we get to verse 18, and it says we have the first mention of the 3 sons, and that syncs up with Joshua 5, 32 through 36, where Noah chose the 3 sons just 7 days before the flood from Methuselah's brother Eliakim, I believe. Or was it Lamech's? I think it was Lamech's brother. Whatever it was. It was kin, cousin kind of thing. But what I point out is that you'll note that none of their brothers or siblings, if they had any, made it on the ark, nor did any of their family members. So they clearly fit into the Genesis 6 narrative of all flesh becoming corrupted, which, again, I'll go ahead and read Joshua 4:18. And they're judges and rulers, which I would like to know, because that's English. I would like to know what the Hebrew was there, or Greek. I would like to know if they used words like archon originally. But let's just say it's humans. I'm fine with that too. If we're talking about great men of renown that were aftermath result of, because even though the angels came down and mated with women, had first generation offspring that Josephus likens unto the Titans, they likely had offspring too, because we know that Nephilim can reproduce. We have the sons of Anak, for example. So they can reproduce. And there were also female Nephilim, if we consider the gods of the ancient world to be Nephilim, women of renown. So you have in the Greek mythology Titans that Josephus likens to the first generation Nephilim. Well, in the Greek mythology you have what's next, the Olympians. And below the Olympians you have the demigods, and heroes and all kinds of other stuff. It keeps going down. So I have no problem believing that the judges and rulers here could be perhaps in the Olympian class, if we go that route. whatever the case may be, Joshua says these people that were ruling over the rest of the people went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth and the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth that it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on the earth, all men and all animals. How did that happen? Through genetic manipulation. And that's also backed up, second witness in Jubilees 7:24. The after this of Jubilees 7, because Jubilees 7, the verses prior to verse 24, is talking about the angel incursion. And it says after that, after this, the after that of Genesis 6:4 is the after this of Jubilees 7:24, still in a pre-flood context. Says they sinned against the beasts and the birds and all that moved and walked on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth, and every imagination, the desire of men, imagined vanity and evil continually. So, as I always say in my conference, as Paul Harvey would say, that's the rest of the story. Right? Now, when I was thinking about sinned against the animals, again, that's a reference to genetic manipulation, which created the animal-human hybrids of mythology. In my opinion, the satyrs and the minotaur, centaurs and that sort of thing, which appears to have made a way for the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim to have host bodies to once again inhabit, thus bringing about their return. What am I talking about there? Well, Dr. Judd Burton, Judd, you guys ever talk?
I'm not sure. I don't remember meeting him. No.
He would be a good guest to get on your show sometime to talk about. Really cool guy. He's a believer. He's an archaeologist. Fashions himself to be a Indiana Jones of sorts. And he wrote a book called Interview with the Giant. And in his book, he writes, despite the loss of their physical bodies from dying in the flood, there is reason to believe that the giants' spirits continue to exist. In this state, they were and are demonic entities. Like other sentient creatures, they have an eternal spirit at their essence. Therefore, the Nephilim and related tribes of giants never really ceased to exist. Only their physicality was lost. And, I looked at that and I thought, well, okay, so you have angels mate with humans create Nephilim that were never meant to be in the first place. And so when they die, when you kill one of those, and I maintain that at the very least, it's the angel-human hybrids that produce Nephilim when you kill them. I don't know if animal-human hybrids do. I don't know. Enoch tells you point blank that the angel-human hybrids do. You kill one, their spirit goes out and has nowhere to go. It doesn't. So it becomes a wandering spirit, a demon. And so my thought was, okay, so if these angels had animal qualities to them, like we see the cherubim do, right? The face of an ox, of an eagle, of a lion, and a human. And I've heard Chuck Missler and others talk about what's missing. You got the fish are missing, the lizards are missing, the insects are missing. If you think of kingdoms being represented there, and so Satan being the anointed cherub, that perhaps he was of that class, and that's why so-called alien abduction scenarios always describe what? Reptilians and insectoids, and you got Dogon fish god type things, Dagon or whatever. So I mean that's speculation, admittedly, but I think it's reasonable speculation. So Sheila and I were talking one time, and she's like, "Well, what if because you have to ask the question: why did they decide to blend species, animals, and stuff? What was the reason for it?" And if you think about it this way, if angel incursions have been cut off, Satan didn't just give up. He never gives up. He's going to find another way. And we know that man was made in the image and likeness of God, which is the problem in Genesis 6:3. Is if it says, "My spirit will no longer dwell with man because he's flesh." Well, he's been flesh since the Garden of Eden. Man has been flesh since the Garden of Eden. And our body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. So he created our bodies in his likeness as a dwelling place into which he can dwell. But if we corrupt this image into something that is not the image of God, he says, I ain't going there. My spirit can't dwell there. You're no longer in my image. You've corrupted it. And so Sheila's like, well, what if the angels were trying to create beings after their likeness? Especially if angels have animal characteristics, if some of them do. And I thought, that's interesting. So I was looking at Judd Burton's quote there. it seemed to make sense. Maybe I just put it that way. It seemed to make sense. Um, and what I was talking about regarding the demons, that's in Enoch chapter 15, 8 through 12. I'm not going to read all that, but that's where we find out when you kill a Nephilim that their spirit goes out and becomes a wandering spirit called a demon, unclean. And so for those listening on the radio, I've got a chart on the screen that people can see on YouTube, but it depicts sort of a timeline that I believe the Genesis 6 experiment took place in 3550 BC. And Enoch says the first generation Nephilim would kill each other off into this big civil war that the Greeks later stylized into the what became known as the Clash of the Titans. And that ends somewhere around close to 3000, 3100-ish time period. And so you have the Mayan calendar, the Aztec calendar stone, all that stuff. People are talking about December 21st, 2012. That thing shows up at 3114 BC. About 20 years later or so is the end of the first generation Nephilim. Shortly after that, the Watchers, the parents that had to watch their children massacre each other, they were judged, bound, and buried. And then sometime shortly after that, Enoch is raptured. And then about 70 to 80 years later, Noah's born, and his daddy names him Rest, which makes sense because he's born after the Clash of the Titans. Lamech, Noah's father, his name was Despairing, which makes sense if you're born during the time of the Clash of the Titans. It would have been pretty crazy. So, but at this point, when Noah's born, you got 500 years to the flood, 700 years from the judgment of the Watchers. So that's why I'm like, okay, what got God so upset then that he had to wipe out man and the animals? He judged the angels and he judged the first generation Nephilim. Why did he judge man? Well, that's Genesis 6:3 again. That's when the 6 through 12. That's when they blended with animals together, and that's when the corruption of all flesh took place. And in the 120 years, Shem, Ham, and Japheth were born, about the 100-year mark, because they were, in the 100-ish years of age at the time of the flood. I talk about dinosaurs and stuff, and how I believe that God created the long neck and the vegetarian type dinosaurs, the herbivores, using behemoth as a possible explanation for that, and showing a hippo with a little tail. Does the hippo's tail look like a cedar tree? No, no, I don't think so. Then, of course, we also have lots of depictions on, cave walls and sculptures, like in a temple in Cambodia.
Stones.
Yeah, showing various herbivore class dinosaurs.
Right.
You do sometimes see the T-Rex class too, occasionally. But I'm of the opinion that the T-Rex, velociraptors, and those sort of things, they came as a result of the corruption of all flesh, and verses like Enoch 7:5, the Nephilim, began to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish. Jubilees 5:24, same thing. Everything corrupted their ways, and they began to devour each other. Well, look at a velociraptor, look at a T-Rex. I mean, those are devourers. Pretty much everything. Going through this real quick, the names: Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. Chuck Missler pointed out, if you look at the meaning of their names, the definition of their names, and string it together in a sentence in the order that's given, you get, man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest. Well, I mean, that's
awesome.
That's the whole plan of God.
Exactly.
Right there in the names of the, first 10 patriarchs.
10 generations, yeah.
So Jared shall come down. That's when the Watchers came down, teaching Enoch. That's, Watchers. Enoch taught against the Watchers. Methuselah, his death shall bring. The connotation is judgment, and that's what his name means. His judgment is coming. Despairing. Well, again, he was born during the first generation Nephilim, and Rest, Noah was born after the first generation Nephilim. So, if I bring that timeline chart up again, that reveals what I'm talking about there, with the corruption of all flesh and whatnot. So, who made it and who didn't make it on the ark? Well, of the fowls after their kind, of the cattle after their kind, we see in Genesis 6:20. Every creeping thing of the earth after his kind. In the self-same day entered Noah and Shem and Japheth and the sons of Noah, Noah's wife, and the three wives of the sons with them into the ark, they and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind. What I thought was interesting was that phrase, after their kind, is curiously missing for the humans.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Right? Everything else,
Right.
you know, it has a descriptor after it. So I'm going, hey, it's circumstantial evidence maybe, but it's certainly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
15 cubits, this is Genesis 7:20 through 22. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. All flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beasts and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died. It doesn't say anything about after their kind in
Yeah, that's very interesting.
chapter 7 either, yeah, right? So what I like to point out to people when we're talking about end times and things of that day, that nature, the days of Jared were marked by the activity of angels mating with humans. However, in the days of Noah, it was the creation of animal-human hybrids that brought about the corruption of all flesh, which eventually led to the judgment of the flood. And that's what Yeshua said. If we take his statement in Matthew 24:37 literally, then all we need to do is turn on the evening news, right? I mean,
right.
There we're seeing the repeat of not of angels mating with humans like the days of Jared, but rather the recreation of animal-human hybrids, exactly as it was in the days of Noah. And a couple of books I'd recommend people check out is Corrupting the Image by Doug Hamp and Forbidden Gates by Tom and Nita Horn. And I had those two books when I was forming my thesis for all this for Archon Invasion. I had those two books on my desk arranged in that order. Doug Hamp's book, Corrupting Image, on the left, and Tom and Nita Horn's book on the right next to Doug's book. And I looked at the two titles, and I'm like, wait a minute. What if that's the pattern, right? What if that's that's the formula? If you corrupt the image that God originally created and called good, you end up opening forbidden gates that bring about the creation or recreation, in my opinion, of Nephilim. And so if we look up the word Nephilim, that's Strong's number 5303, Nephil, from the fall, properly a feller, a bully, a tyrant, a giant. Nephal, Strong's 5307, to cast down, cease, die, divide, by lot, let fail, primitive root to fall, in a great variety of applications. I'm going to read all this. Let's see. Fugitive, to be judged, perish, rot, slay, smite out, throw down. So 435 times that word is used in the Bible, Nephal. So, Nephilim, derived from the word Nephal. Nephilim are often said to be fallen ones. Some associate the Nephilim with being the fallen angels. Not so. They are the offspring of the angels. Put more simply, Nephilim can be defined as those which are fallen from their original state, i.e. the way God created them to be. And then I asked the question, can Nephilim be produced in other ways besides being the offspring of angels? And of course, the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. Based on Genesis 1:27, God created man in his own image, in his own likeness. In the image of God, he created he them, right? If we go to Ezekiel 1:5 through 10, and also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of four living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and every one had four faces, and every one had four wings, and their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass, and they had the hands of a man under their wings on their four sides, and they four had their faces and their wings. Their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went every one straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, they four had the face of a man, the face of a lion on the right side, and they four had the face of an ox on the left side. They four also had the face of an eagle. So, could it be, again, that the angels were trying to create something in their likeness, in other words, a host body that would be fit for the angel-human hybrid demonic spirits that were wandering around as a result of the Clash of the Titans? And as I'm thinking of that, hopefully the audio will play here. There's a movie called Splice, which I always tell people, don't go see that. I don't recommend you see it. But if this will play, listen to what the director had to say, what their intention was. Splice was about the creation of an animal-human hybrid. Listen to what their intention was behind that creature, what they intended to create. Oops.
Splice is about two young, brilliant scientists played by Adrian Brody and Sarah Polley. And what they do is create hybrid organisms by splicing DNA from different species for a large pharmaceutical company. But they're young and they're ambitious, and what they really want to do is add human DNA to the mix. But the company objects to this, so they do it in secret. And then terrible, terrible things result.
You can't let her out. Specimens need to be contained.
Don't call her that.
What's going on?
Part of the excitement of watching this film is not knowing what Dren will ultimately become, because she evolves in her life cycle. She evolves in a very radical way, and she actually begins as something quite ugly, a creature or a child that only a mother could love. But as she grows, she turns into something quite beautiful, something that is possibly a step up on the evolutionary ladder.
I always thought of Dren as a genetically engineered angel. So she was always going to have a kind of bird component to her, and she was always intended to have wings, and there was always going to be something delicate and beautiful about her, and something, maybe that's more beautiful than a human being.
There is a sexual component to this story. There's a sexual component to the relationship between the scientist and the creature that's about as Freudian as you can get.
You've crossed the line.
What did you expect when you made it? Didn't you have a plan?
The prime directive of any life form is to procreate. And when you create something like Dren, that's an aspect of her being that you're going to have to address. And I think what's so wonderful about the horror genre is that it gives you license to go to places that you could never comfortably go with a normal film.
Become unstable.
This is the disaster everyone warns about. A new species set loose in the world.
I mean, this film on some level is about, well, on many levels is about evolution. It's about...
I'm going to stop there because we're about ready to go to break. But yeah, I mean, they came right out and said that their goal with Dren, as the name of this animal-human hybrid, was to create a genetically engineered angel. Right. They told you point blank that's what there was. I'm going, wow. I mean, what if that's what they were trying to do in the pre-flood world?
Oh yeah, absolutely believe so. Fit extension, for
exactly.
And I think that this is what they're even doing now in some of these deep underground bases, as Thomas Costello and others have, brought to public knowledge and lost their lives in doing so.